15 years ago, a movie was produced called Minority Report, starring Tom Cruise. Some of you may remember it. One of the things they did in producing the movie was they reached out to some of the foremost futurists in the world at the time, since the movie was set in the year 2050, and said, what was life going to be like in 2050, so they could go ahead and set the story in a scene that was as realistic as an estimate of the future as they could come up with at the time. In one of the scenes of the movie, Tom Cruise, or his character, John Anderson, walks into a retail shopping mall and enters a retail store. Let's take a look at what happens for a potential picture of the future. Can you roll the video, please? Well, in their future, apparently, even in 2050, automated systems can make mistakes. It can be very difficult. Actually, in my opinion, there are two places where they slipped up with their projection of the future. And one is that, while I think everything that they projected here is going to come true, and much more, they projected it for 2050. They were about 20 years late. We'll have virtually everything you saw there by 2030, and much of it before then. And secondly, with blockchain-enabled systems, you would never have John Anderson confused with Mr. Yakamoto. But more about that tomorrow. It's tough to make this kind of prediction. I mean, as that great American philosopher, Yogi Berra, put it so well, making predictions is very hard, especially about the future. Nevertheless, I'm going to go out on a limb today and make a couple of predictions for you. And I have to warn you, my predictions are not always well received. I was in a situation about 20 years ago where I was talking about to this new emerging technology called the World Wide Web to a group of manufacturers. And I had an actual display of this, I said, now what we're looking at up on the screen is called a website. And they're, okay, website. And I said, now, don't worry about where this comes from. It's created by a little tiny startup nobody's ever heard of. They call themselves Amazon.com. So I logged on to Amazon, ordered a copy of my latest book, had it shipped to the president of the association, and I said, so what do you think? Now, this is a room full of senior executives of mid-sized, billion-dollar manufacturing companies, so no dummies in the room. One guy raises his hand. I said, yes. He said, that was very cool, Jack, very interesting, but help me understand, what has this got to do with us? We're manufacturers. We don't sell books. Well, not everybody believes that applications of new technology that apply to one area of our economy or society necessarily apply to them. People are always looking for opportunities to be able to opt out of change. Similarly, I was speaking to a group around the same time, technology people. And after I painted this near-term picture of what the future was like with this emerging business practice called electronic commerce, a fellow came up to me and he said, Jack, he said, I like your optimism and enthusiasm about the future, but obviously you don't understand very much about technology. I said, well, please enlighten me. And he said, well, we don't even really have the processing power. We may never have the bandwidth, and we're certainly never going to have the security. So this notion you're peddling that someday people are going to be able to sit at their computers and do their banking electronically online, it'll never happen. It just can't be done. Well, whether, again, somebody doesn't believe in a prediction because they don't think it applies to them or their industry, or because they think it's just simply technically impossible, I urge you, nevertheless, to please try to keep an open mind and join me on a short trip to the near future. This is Luke and Annie. Luke and Annie are very excited. They're planning a dinner party this weekend for 3 other couples who are close friends. But first, they have to plan the menu and select the ingredients and prepared foods that they'd like to use. Fortunately, they live right down the street from the brand new branch of one of the most exciting retail destinations around, Le Eat. Le Eat is a modern food hall, a combination grocery store, specialty food emporium, and self-serve restaurant. Luke and Annie think they'll find what they need and perhaps get a few new good ideas while they're there. When they walk in the door of Le Eat, a picture of Annie's face flashes up on her smartphone, and a Le Eat robo-host, speaking to her through her smartphone, says, "Welcome back to Le Eat, Annie. Would you like to shop with us here today?" When Annie says yes, the robo-host says, "Will it be okay to use your standard payment method if you find something you like?" And again, Annie says yes. Le Eat's robo-host asks Annie if she has a shopping list she'd like to share. When she does so, the robo-host displays a map of the store showing her the most convenient route to find each of the items she has listed. It then tells her that it appears from the items she's listed that she's planning to make a chocolate ganache cake, and asks if that's correct. When she says yes, it lists several other items not on her list and asks her if she might also need any of these other ingredients typically used in a chocolate ganache cake. When she realizes that she's out of baking powder, she asks the robo-host to add it to her list. The robo-host then mentions that the pastry shop has several kinds and sizes of prepared chocolate ganache cakes ready-made, and asks if they'd like to see them before buying the ingredients. They decide that's a good idea, so they review the selections and taste a couple of bites offered by the human hostess at the bakery. They decide it's so good, they'll save the time and have a freshly baked cake delivered to their place the morning of the party. The robo-host asks if they'd like the items needed exclusively for making their own cake removed from the shopping list, and Annie agrees. Next, they go to the butcher shop to pick out a few pounds of flank steak for the main course. They've learned that they particularly like Argentinian grass-fed beef from Mendoza Valley, also famed for its wines, and they ask the butcher if she has any. She shows them some prime cuts. Annie asks exactly where it was raised. The butcher scans a QR code on the beef tray with her smartphone and brings up a map showing exactly which farm in the Mendoza Valley the beef came from. Luke happens to work in international logistics for a technology company, and he's intrigued. He asks the butcher how the beef actually traveled from Argentina to Le Eat. The butcher accommodates him by sharing a file from her smartphone with Luke. It starts by telling him the number and age of the specific steer the beef came from, and the date and time it was slaughtered. It then shows each step of the packaging and transportation process, from the time the beef left the Mendoza Valley until it was delivered to Le Eat this morning. It also validates that the beef was maintained at an optimal temperature between 33 and 37 degrees Fahrenheit at every step in its journey. Next, Luke and Annie go to the grocery section to buy chimichurri sauce to marinate their flank steak, and also to pick out a few other items on their list. They stop by the cheese shop and learn that their favorite camembert is out of stock. But the cheese shop manager suggests they try a Pont l'Evêque, which they like very much, and decide to buy instead. Finally, they go to the wine bar, where they sample several wines they are considering to go with their appetizers, as well as some excellent Mendoza Valley Malbecs to complement the flank steak. They ask their robo-host to deliver the wines they've selected to their place, again the morning of their party. As they walk out of the store, the robo-host gives them the total and asks again if the charges should be billed to their usual payment method. Luke remembers that he has an unusually high balance of points in one of his frequent flyer accounts and says he'll cover the cost from that. He authorizes the payment at the prevailing exchange rate with his thumbprint. No checkout lines, no cashiers. Luke and Annie walk home with the small bags they've decided to carry with them, having enjoyed their morning out together and even more excited about their upcoming dinner party. While Luke and Annie are still walking home, Brianna, the regional merchandising manager for Le Eat, gets a message from the company's intelligent merchandising system. The system tells Brianna it has a recommended change to the standard planogram for this region's stores. Brianna asks what the change is, and the system responds that its analysis shows that 70% of all purchases of chimichurri sauce and similar marinades are accompanied by purchases from the butcher shop. So it recommends that in addition to having these products available in the grocery section, a display be set up at the butcher shop. It shows two planograms and suggests that one is ideal for those stores with layouts and traffic patterns similar to the one where Annie and Luke shop, and the other planogram be used for the remaining stores in the region. The merchandising system estimates that this change would increase the sales of these products by 8%. Brianna likes the idea and approves it. On receiving approval, the merchandising system sends instructions to the store merchandising managers and their robotic stocking staffs. They are given the updated planograms for their stores and asked to implement them the next time shelves are stocked. Meanwhile, in Leit's corporate procurement and supply chain management department, Samantha is the director of vendor relations. She's just received a notification from Leit's dynamic sourcing system. It notifies her that the supply chain management system has updated dynamic sourcing with the information that the current supplier of Camembert has been unable to fulfill orders for the past week. This is due to a production shortfall resulting from extreme weather conditions affecting their part of Normandy. It appears that the problems are likely to last for at least several more weeks. It also notifies her that the purchasing system has canceled open orders with the current supplier while adjusting the amounts due on open unpaid invoices from that supplier. It has slightly increased payment amounts owing to the fact that Leit will now not achieve agreed volume discount levels this quarter. At the same time, can you go back one slide, please? One more. At the same time, it has deducted penalties due to late delivery and unfilled orders. The accounts payable system has already issued a payment correctly reflecting all these adjustments in compliance with their vendor agreement. In addition, the dynamic sourcing system has searched the area for other potential suppliers. It's identified several and confirmed their blockchain-based certifications of both their corporate financials and their product quality inspections. It has also checked social media for customer reviews with an emphasis on timely delivery. Of the three top qualifiers, it has recommended Fromagerie Normande, which has the top scores, highly competitive prices, and is ready to begin fulfilling orders immediately. The initial order is ready to place. However, since the order is for more than $10,000, setting up the new vendor requires Samantha's approval before the automated purchasing system can issue the order. Samantha reviews the new vendor information and approves the order. Immediately on her approval, the procurement system releases the order to Fromagerie Normande. Samantha then speaks to the dynamic sourcing system, saying, "This is crazy, reviewing every new vendor for orders at this level. The dynamic sourcing system is much faster and more thorough in identifying and vetting new vendors than the 3-person team I had a few years ago. I haven't overridden a new vendor in more than 2 years, and we haven't had a single problem. Effective immediately, I'll require new vendor approvals only for vendors whose initial orders exceed $50,000. She messages her boss, the Senior Vice President of Procurement and Supply Chain Management, that she's made this change. He responds back that he was wondering when she'd get around to it. And she replies that she had begun to realize it was a waste of time, but that old habits are hard to change. So is this pretty much the way it works at your retail operations today? Maybe not quite yet. Well, so what is going to make these extraordinary examples of innovation possible? Well, among other things, a series of emerging technologies certainly come into play. These include blockchain, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. With respect to blockchain, it's involved throughout this entire process. Everything from uniquely linking Annie's facial scan to her actual personal digital identification, to being able to assist in verifying and validating the movement of the meat from Argentina to the lead store, and a host of others. Much more about blockchain to come tomorrow morning when we'll get into more detail on that. At the same time, Internet of Things technology comes into play in enabling the grab-and-go capabilities of the retail store and not having to have cashiers and checkout lines. Also, again, with the meat shipment, with sensors that are tracking the temperature and location of the meat at every point throughout the process. Internet of Things technology is going to profoundly affect not only retail, but every other major industry around the world over the next few years. And finally, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is much more than just what we hear about machine learning as a result of a tremendous amount of research and development done initially at Google over the last 5 to 10 years. In fact, there's a host of artificially intelligent technologies that are increasingly coming into play and interacting with one another. Large quantities of data are coming out of our business infrastructures, but they're also coming from places like Internet of Things sensors. We've got big data technologies now that can crunch that data across multiple machines and hosts, and increasingly these days in the cloud. We've got natural language processing that can accurately interpret unstructured information, such as that information in emails and on social media. All of this provides input to AI technologies like associative memory for pattern recognition. And here's where machine learning can kick in so that intelligent agent technology can enable automated systems, whether it's the robo-host we talked about or an intelligent merchandising system or a dynamic sourcing system, to think, decide, and act to solve business problems in ways very similar to how human experts address the same problems. We've all known for many years that our very best performers are responsible for a majority of the best results that come out of our business. Again, whether it's managing the procurement process, whether it's sales, whether it's other operational activities, the 80-20 rule seems to hold true, that if we can, the best 20% of the people produce 80% of the best results. But by using intelligent agent technology, we can also enhance the capabilities of the rest of our people who don't yet perhaps have the experience and the knowledge or haven't yet developed the level of judgment that people with 10, 15, or 20 years of doing their profession have developed. And it can assist them and coach them when the people who are the experienced experts don't have the time to take away from their jobs to do that. Similarly, even those who are the top-level experts in the field can have their productivity increased by AI as a result of letting the AI handle the routine number-crunching activities for them and letting them spend more of their time applying that judgment and experience and creativity to solving more difficult and complex problems. This is all leading to what we call the autonomic enterprise. Now, how many people from high school biology remember learning about the autonomic nervous system? Do you recall what that is, anybody? Okay, that's that part of your nervous system that runs all the subconscious functions of your body. So you don't have to think about beating your heart every second, or making yourself breathe, or digesting that breakfast that you just ate. Your body takes care of all of those almost completely subconsciously, unless a problem arises and it brings it to your attention, which allows you to focus on higher order issues. We're going to say the same concept increasingly incorporated into business and other organizations around the world. Let the automated systems handle the routine low-level things more quickly and accurately and consistently than people can ever do, and allow people to focus on strategy and direction and creativity. This will be leading toward autonomous supply chains, not only processes within and across enterprises, but complete supply networks, ecosystems functioning autonomously where products and services, parts and materials, information and funds flow autonomically without any human intervention required in the process, and yet at the same time under the control and direction of human managers who still are able to provide the overall objectives for the systems. One of my favorite quotes from Bill Gates when I think about this kind of change is that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years. and underestimate the changes that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. We've seen a tremendous amount of change in the just over a decade now since smartphones were first introduced. But if you think you've seen a lot of change in the last 10 years, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to see more change in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 50 years. What's it going to take to accommodate all of that change? We've got to change our mindsets, not only welcome change, but seek it out. We've got to change our processes. We've got to change our business models. We've even got to change entire business ecosystems. That's a lot of change. But as the, skipping ahead a moment, as the great historian Henry Steele Commager put it so well, over a century ago, change does not necessarily assure progress, but progress implacably requires change. Take advantage of the next day and a half to stimulate your minds and get excited about the potential for change in yourselves, in your organizations, and in your industries. I look forward to chatting with each of you all later. Thank you so much for listening. 10 years ago next month, October 2008, the height of the global financial crisis, a paper was released onto the internet by a person or group of people still as yet unknown, but under the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto. This paper described how a combination of technologies, including advanced cryptographic and synchronization technologies, could enable the creation of the first digital currency viable as a means of exchange and a store of value. And the paper called this digital currency Bitcoin. The underlying technologies have come to be referred to as blockchain. Now, because Bitcoin was the first functional application of blockchain technologies, many people conflate the two, confusing Bitcoin, the digital currency, with blockchain, the underlying technology. This would be analogous to someone confusing email as the first killer app on the internet with all of the other thousands of things that we can do with internet technology, including blockchain. By October of 2015, 3 years ago next month, The Economist magazine was proclaiming that blockchain technology was the most important advance in record keeping since the invention of the double entry bookkeeping system in Florence, Italy in 1494, over 500 years earlier. So what is it about blockchain technology that makes it so powerful and so transformational? Blockchain technologies let us do 4 things that we could not do before, and do those things simultaneously. And the result is that we can rethink business and social ecosystems in ways we were never able to previously. First of all, blockchains provide a permanent, immutable, signed and time-stamped record of identity, ownership of assets, transactions, or contractual commitments. They allow those records to be shared among 2 or more entities, people, businesses, governmental organizations, agencies, regulators, auditors, what have you, without any of the participants having to depend on any one of the others to be the master record keeper, and without having to pay a third-party intermediary to be that master record keeper. For those participants so authorized, this information becomes readily, globally available. And for that subset of those who are authorized to update it, they can do so quickly and easily from anywhere in the world. while at the same time for those not authorized to update it or even to see it, they provide unhackable security against those changes or even that information being seen. Now, as soon as I use the word unhackable, the hackles raise up on the back of a lot of people's necks, and people say, well, Jack, I don't understand. Given enough time and resources, can't anything be hacked? Well, let me explain how it works and why I say that. And to explain how it works, let's go back to the original application of blockchain, which is the Bitcoin digital currency. One of the first things we need to understand is, what do we mean by blockchain? Well, information is stored in blockchain implementations, and there are hundreds and hundreds of implementations of blockchain technology all over the world. Information is stored in a series of records, or blocks as they are referred to. And those blocks are linked using what are called hashing algorithms. Now, to explain how hashing works, and it's important that you understand this because this is the key really to virtually every type of major cryptography to begin with. It underlies the concept of how we are able to securely purchase items on the World Wide Web, for example. Blockchain is just one of the applications of cryptographic technology that includes hashing. So let me ask you a question. How many people here have ever taken an apple or another piece of fruit or vegetable and put it in a juicer and gotten juice out as a result, or watched somebody do that? Anybody ever do it? See it? Right. We all have. We all have. Okay. Now, how many people here have ever taken a pitcher of juice, poured it into a juicer, run it backwards, and gotten an apple out? No? Green pepper? Maybe? Carrots? No? It's an irreversible process. It only goes one way. You cannot go backwards. So there are mathematical functions that work exactly the same way. These hashing algorithms can take the content of a file, and regardless of the size or complexity of that file, create a fixed length set of characters as output, uniquely representing the contents of that file. But there is no way you can start with that string of characters and work backwards to figure out what the contents of the file were. So whether it's a single word, or whether it's a sentence, or whether it's the entire contents of War and Peace, you'll still get a fixed length series of characters as output. And if you make any change at all, such as if you change the contents of the file from reading "the red fox runs across the ice" to "the red fox walks across the ice," you will get a different output from that file. And even if the change is extremely minor, like you delete a single comma from the entire contents of War and Peace, you will get a different output. And not just a slightly different output because it's only a very small change. You will get a completely radically different output. Now, this comes into play when we look at how data is stored in blocks on the blockchain. So, for example, one of the key pieces of information in each block, in the header of each block, is the hash of the contents of the previous block. So you run the contents of block 51 through a hashing algorithm, and the value of the hash that comes out of that is put in the header of block 52. Then when block 52 is complete, you run that through the same hashing algorithm, and the contents of that hash are put in the header of block 53, and so forth for the hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of blocks in any particular blockchain implementation. So if a hacker were to be able to break into an instance of a blockchain and say that in block 51 contained information that they wanted to change illicitly to their advantage in some way, well, if they were successful in hacking in, they might be able to make that change to block 51. The problem would be then, however, now the hash of block 51 would no longer match the value of the hash stored in the header of block 52. So they would have to update that hash in the header of block 52 for that block to be consistent. But having changed the value of the hash in the header of block 52, now the hash of block 52 is going to be different from the hash value stored in the header of block 53, so they're going to have to rewrite that block. And every single one of the hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of blocks all the way to the end of that blockchain, just to make a single change. And yet people say, well, I suppose if you had enough resources and computing power, you could break into that, because after all, isn't it true that any computer can be hacked given enough resources and computing power? And the answer is yes, that's true. That's why blockchain data is not stored on any computer. It's stored on many computers. Depending on the implementation of blockchain, it's stored on anywhere from dozens to hundreds to thousands of computers all over the world in all different kinds of environments, on premises, in the cloud, with extremely sophisticated security protecting each and every one of these individual nodes of the blockchain. So if somebody were to hack into one of those nodes, as I just described, and successfully rewrite all those blocks on the blockchain all the way to the end, so that now that node of the blockchain reflects some information that is illicitly advantageous to them in some way, all that would happen is that the synchronization technology on the blockchain would look at it and see that the values on this node no longer match what every other node has. It is invalid. Ignore that node until it matches up with the rest of us. So what this hypothetical hacker would have to do would be to simultaneously hack into a majority of the nodes on the blockchain and change them all in exactly the same way at the same time. And they'd have to be very fast with it, because as soon as that blockchain resynchronizes, their efforts to illicitly make changes to it are gone for naught, and they'd have to start all over again. The largest, oldest, and slowest blockchain is the Bitcoin blockchain, and that synchronizes every 10 minutes. Many private or permissioned blockchains, as they're often referred to, synchronize in seconds or even fractions of a second. A Harvard physicist estimated a few years ago that the amount of energy that would be required to drive the amount of computing power that would be necessary to simultaneously hack a majority of the 7,000 nodes on the Bitcoin blockchain around the world and change them all and get that all done in less than 10 minutes before the Bitcoin blockchain synchronizes the next time would be approximately equal to the amount of energy emitted during the same period of time by the sun. So some of you are saying, so in theory you could hack into it, right? Well, yes, technically, mathematically, in theory you could do it, but it is so wildly economically impossible that there are just far better ways for those who are trying to steal from others to accomplish those objectives. Now, it's important that you understand that this doesn't mean we don't have to pay attention to security anymore, because some of you who are familiar with the area may say, well, wait a minute, what's all this I've read about people having their Bitcoin stolen? Bitcoins have been stolen, many millions of dollars on numerous occasions, but they're not stolen from the Bitcoin blockchain or by altering the transactional records stored on the Bitcoin blockchain. What happens is that the private keys that people use to be able to access and control their blockchain are what gets, their Bitcoin, are what gets stolen. And if they're foolish enough to leave their private keys in online exchanges that are stored in a single centralized location, if and when that exchange or location is hacked and those private keys are compromised, now the Bitcoin is gone, or stolen as the case might be. So that's why people who invest significant amounts of money in Bitcoin and other digital currencies don't store it online. In fact, despite the protestations of some utopians who thought that digital currencies would make the banking industry go away, the generally accepted best practice for storing Bitcoin and digital currency in any large value amounts is to store it on an external device called a hardware wallet, sort of like a specialized form of a flash drive, and then take that wallet down to your corner bank and put it in a safety deposit box and keep it there until you need anything more than whatever, a few hundred or a few $1,000s that you might be willing to put at very, very, very small risk by storing in online exchanges. But as a result of the capabilities of blockchain technology, we now have the ability to share information among participants in a business or social ecosystem. Far more powerful and effective than we've ever had before. Now, how many people have heard of the second law of thermodynamics? Ever took a high school physics class, science course, anything like that? We've got a few that were willing to admit that. Okay, the second law of thermodynamics is about entropy. And an increase in entropy is an increase in disorder. All things in our universe have a tendency to degrade from being highly ordered to being more disordered. And the data that we use to manage our businesses and manage our relationships with our suppliers and our customers and other external parties that we interact with also is subject to entropy. Here I happen to have a friend of mine who's a good hacker hacked into your company's data systems and came up with this visualization of how neatly ordered all the data are in your company's systems. I don't know if you've seen this particular image before or not, but actually this is a piece of artwork. But the point is that very, very few people have extremely well-structured, well-organized data systems in place. Partly because even within organizations, much less across organizations, it's very difficult to keep that synchronized. In order to keep that synchronized, you would have to have some means of, in real time, having easily shared data that's permanent, unchangeable, that has a valid track of who has maintained and updated that data, and that cannot be hacked by others, which in fact is exactly what you get with blockchain. Ron Stewart talked yesterday about the significance of perfect data and why perfect data is so important, not just to recovery of losses in the procurement and supply chain management areas, but to management of our businesses as a whole. Blockchain technology, for the first time, will enable us to get as close as we'll ever get in this world to perfect data. And once people began to realize that, and that blockchain could be used for viable digital currencies, they said, well, what else could we use blockchain for? Why not electronic medical records? Now think about how much you would miss getting to have the fun of every time you go back into the same doctor's office you were just in last month, filling out that same 5-page form with your entire medical history on it, just in case they have burned all their files in the last 4 weeks since you had your last meeting with them. But that's something that's likely to happen as a result of electronic medical records. Not electronic medical records that will belong to the healthcare provider, or to the insurance company, or to a big technology company like Google or Amazon, but that will belong to each of us individually, that we will have control over, and we will be able to authorize the appropriate healthcare providers or insurance companies to update as appropriate or to see the information that we wish to allow them to see without anybody being able to see anything they're not allowed to see. Similarly with land titles. How many people have ever bought or sold real estate? Most of you, of course. And once you come to an agreement on price, and assuming you've already got, if you're paying a mortgage, if you haven't bought the real estate with cash, if you have, hallelujah, congratulations. But for the rest of us mortals who have mortgages on our properties, assuming you've been approved for a mortgage and you agree on a price, what is the one thing that holds up the closing of the deal the longest? The title search. Right. Typically anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks just to get the results of the title search back. Cook County, Illinois is in the process of converting all of its 5 million land titles, third largest number of any jurisdiction in the United States at any level, to blockchain over the next several years. And when they complete it, what that means is that they and the many other places around the world that are doing the same thing will be able to complete title searches not in weeks, but in seconds. Similarly, people have said, why not purchase orders and shipping notices and related information we use to manage our relationships with our suppliers and our transportation carriers, our logistics organizations, in managing the cost and effectiveness of our supply chains as effectively as possible. And that's something that is in fact already happening. Another kind of artifact, a specialized kind of artifact that can be stored on blockchains, are smart contracts. Now, a smart contract is much more than just a digital version of a traditional printed contract, although it would be very helpful just for that purpose if that was all you did, to store a copy of the final version of the contract on the blockchain, so we would all be able to agree and have a single place we could refer to. This is in fact the final version that we all agreed to. But they go way beyond that, because smart contracts are computer programs that run on blockchains, can manage custody over assets that are on a blockchain, such as funds placed in escrow pending completion of a transaction of some type, can track what has happened to date. An example of that would be that the buyer has received the items purchased in good working condition, and based on that information then automatically transfer funds from the buyer to the seller in payment for those goods. And in real time, if the buyer and seller agree to do that. If the buyer and seller decide for some reason that they want the seller, in addition to selling whatever product or service they do to the buyer, to be in the banking business and loan money to the buyer, and they both agree to do that, then you could use outdated business practices such as 30-day terms and 60-day terms and 90-day terms. Most people are beginning to realize that if you need to borrow money, borrowing money from your suppliers is not typically an efficient and cost-effective way to do it in a well-managed, cost-effective relationship. But again, that option is still open for you. There's nothing about smart contracts that says you have to settle the payment in real time, but the process becomes completely automated, which means something's missing. What happened to the invoices? Oh my gosh, we're not going to have to, what are all these people processing invoices going to do if we've got automated systems that can look at the contract? Look, we're still going to need purchase orders. That's what part of the contract is about, of course, the agreement to buy at a given price. And again, we all know invoices have no legal standing whatsoever. Unless that information is explicitly embedded in the contract, invoices are simply reminders to pay according to the terms of the purchase order. Nevertheless, they've become embedded in our consciousnesses. If we're going to have a procurement operation, invoice processing is a necessary part of it. No, it's not. It's just become something that's a practical way of doing things in the absence of having consistent information shared between buyer and seller. And so invoices are just one example of one function or document, whichever way you want to look at it, that can go away as a result of blockchain technology. Now, smart contracts and blockchain technology are already having a tremendous impact on business practices and processes around the world. As long as 2 years ago, this upcoming November, I had the opportunity to keynote the Global Big Data Conference in Qingdao. Qingdao is a port city on the northeast coast of China between Shanghai and Beijing. It's the fourth largest port in China. And by an extraordinary coincidence, a blockchain proof of concept that I had been following for a couple of months resulted in the arrival of a ship at the port of Qingdao the weekend before I spoke at the Big Data Conference. And the ship was carrying a load of cotton sold from a company in Houston, Texas to a company in China. Now, as most of you know today in international trade, that regardless of whether the actual physical exchange of goods takes place on a more timely basis, that the actual formal transfer of ownership of internationally shipped goods from buyer to seller with whatever appropriate customs or border crossing reporting and controls must be filed, and the payment from the buyer to the seller for the goods, and the payment from the buyer to the freight carrier for the transportation of the products, it typically takes about 10 business days to settle that out in full and have complete records of the transfer of ownership and finality of the settlement of the payment for the product and service. In this particular case, because each of the pallets of cotton had a barcode on it, they were able to quickly visually verify the completeness and quality of the pallet, scan each of those, on completion of which the ownership of the cotton was transferred, payment was transferred from the seller to the buyer, from the buyer to the seller, and from the buyer to the ocean freight carrier company, and the entire process was completed not in 10 days, but in 10 minutes. Think about the implications for working capital management of being able to settle up international trade in minutes or seconds rather than days or weeks. It's going to have a huge impact on us. Walmart has had a problem, as have all other international importers of food, with the fact that it's just the reality of life, that sometimes food arrives and by the time it gets to the store shelf, it's not the quality you would like it to see. And in the worst case, you could even have a situation like E. coli or something like that getting into certain kinds of food products and so forth. They were importing mangoes from China, still are as far as I know. And what they found a couple of years ago was that it was quite problematic for them that if they ran into a problem, if when food got to the store shelf, there was something wrong with it, tracking back the actual original source of that food to the original location overseas, in China in this case, was extremely time-consuming process. It took over 6 days on the average to put together all of the paperwork, match everything up, and find out exactly which farm or orchard that product came from so that they could, if necessary, pull it off the shelves at the stores that it was shipped to. And what do you do in the meantime? Do you pull it off the shelves of all the stores all over the country? Do you cross your fingers and just hope nobody else gets sick? A very difficult situation. As a result, though, of implementing blockchain technology for tracking this all the way from the farm to the retail store shelf, they're now able to get that information in approximately 2 seconds and be able to quickly and easily see that now we know not only exactly where it came from, but we also know exactly which stores are the ones that have this particular possibly defective product on their shelves. We can have it pulled off at those stores only, knowing, being comfortable that the product at the rest of the stores from other sources is going to be secure. We also see it being used in e-commerce. So Mercado Libre is Latin America's most popular e-commerce site, over $1 billion in revenues. And one of the challenges with e-commerce is that while we've all become quite appropriately comfortable with the idea that our actual payment transactions are going to be secure while they're going across the internet and being processed, is that if in fact the e-commerce company had a bad guy on the inside who was they could use internal systems in some way if the proper controls were not in place and well enforced, to, for example, take your order and instead of having it shipped to you, having it sent to the employee's brother-in-law, who could then take this unexpected windfall and take it out and sell it and make money, and you end up having paid for something you never got, and meanwhile it disappeared. And if, on the other hand, by recording the information about the details of the transaction on the blockchain, it becomes extremely difficult to go in after the fact and retroactively change, for example, the ship-to location from your location as the purchasing consumer to some other location that they're trying to use to rip off the system as a result. And by hashing the information and embedding the hash value of the information, you don't even have the information about your purchase stored online on the blockchain itself. It's simply that if there's a need to reconstruct what actually happened, you can go back and look at the information and see if the information, for example, on the shipping notice, ship-to location information now matches up, if the hash of that information matches up with the hash that's stored on the blockchain. If it does, it's valid. If it doesn't, somebody has changed it, and you can begin then to track down who, where, and why, how that happened. Another type of artifact that can be stored on the blockchain is a self-sovereign digital identity. Now, what this means is we can use blockchain technology, and there are a number of initiatives underway to facilitate this process right now, to allow each of us to own our own blockchain-based records of our digital identity, storing not only traditional information like name, address, birthday, telephone number, but information that typically comes from governments or other official organizations like passport numbers, national ID cards, driver's licenses, and tying back that information to biometrics, fingerprints, voice prints, retinal scans, facial scans, so that we can uniquely tie your identifying information to your physical presence as a person here on the planet. And the result of that, and that's something, again, you will be able to control that. It's not something that's going to be owned by a governmental organization or a bank or a big technology company. And as a result of that, what that means is we will be able to essentially eliminate identity theft over time as a majority of people move into this kind of capability over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. Confirm professional credentials. Wouldn't you like to know that the doctor who's got this beautifully framed Harvard Medical School certificate hanging on the wall actually did in fact go to Harvard Medical School and graduated? Not just happened to walk across the campus one day. Yeah, I went to Harvard Medical School. Yeah, so did I. And I went to MIT, and I went to Princeton and Yale and all of these other schools. I've visited all of those locations. Okay, it also can ensure that people will get efficient execution of government services so that everybody authorized to receive government services or payments can quickly and easily receive those payments without anybody who's not authorized to fraudulently receiving those payments. And it will allow customers and suppliers to know your customers and know your sellers. And this is extremely important as you look at the provenance of products, parts, or materials that you might be purchasing. More about that in a few minutes. But identification on the blockchain is not just about people. It's also about things, such as in the Internet of Things. Now, it was 3 years ago in 2015 that the number of things connected to the Internet exceeded the number of people connected to the Internet at approximately 5 billion out of the then 7 billion people on the Internet. But the number of things connected is growing much, much faster. And it's estimated that, well, by the end of the next decade, approximately 7 billion out of the then estimated 8 billion population of the world will be connected to the Internet. There are likely to be more than 1 trillion things connected to the Internet. 3D printing technologies are enabling us to be able to create objects with the Internet of Things circuitry embedded in the object to begin with. So it's not going to be a matter in the near future of us having to decide whether an object is so valuable or so important that it justifies the expense and complication of attaching a chip to the outside of the object so that we can track that object or have sensors or have it communicate its location or what have you. The objects can be created, will be able to be created, innately able to participate in the Internet of Things. The problem is this. When you've got advanced artificial intelligence technologies, because who in the world can keep track of 1 trillion things and what they're all saying and doing? You've got to have advanced AI capabilities to monitor these things, understand what they mean, take initial low-level actions, and report back to people when there are issues that need the attention of an authorized human being. But how do you know that the data that purports to have come from a particular thing actually came from that thing and has not been hacked to look like it came from something else? This is something very important to you if that data that's coming from that thing is your heart monitor in the hospital on which the doctors are making decisions about how to treat you. We want to make sure that their technology-enabled decisions are based on the information that came from your heart monitor and not that of the person down the hall. How do we know that which thing it came from, and that information wasn't, are we good? That information wasn't accidentally changed or hacked by somebody with bad intent for whatever purpose. Again, whether it's medical, whether it's the value in supply chain items, whether it's the truck driver that's decided with his truckload of food that he's going to pocket a couple of gas loads of extra diesel fuel by letting the product warm up and not air conditioning it until the last 2 hours before he gets to the delivery. How are we going to keep track of all that stuff? Well, that's where blockchain technology can not only validate which thing is the source of that information, but ensure that that information is stored immutably until it is used and acted on by automated systems and people making decisions based on that information. The end result of the combination of blockchain technology with Internet of Things, 3D printing, and especially artificial intelligence, is that essentially every industry is going to be impacted by blockchain. All right, now let me ask you a question. How many people can name 3 industries that have not been affected by the Internet in the last 20 years? Can anybody name one? I don't think so. And the same thing will be happening with blockchain technology, especially as we integrate blockchain technologies. And if you don't happen to see your industry on here, I think most of you probably do, but if you didn't, it's only because I ran out of space on the slide, not because blockchain's not going to impact your industry. Sorry, you're not off the hook. And in fact, we've got industry consortia in a number of leading industries working together to try to develop and implement use cases for blockchain. Now, don't try to write all this stuff down. You'll get copies of this slide deck later. But this is just a tiny, tiny subset of the literally thousands of use cases of blockchain that have been identified as potential applications across many, many different industries, hundreds of which are already under development and in many, many cases actually in production today. There's a common misconception that, well, blockchain is a cool concept and it works fine for Bitcoin and digital currencies, but nobody ever actually really uses it for anything else. Wrong, as I explained in the case of Walmart, as I explained in the case of Mercado Libre, and again, hundreds and hundreds of other examples of real live implementations of blockchain in production already today. Now, being procurement professionals, you of course are interested in what is the impact of blockchain on purchase order management. We've touched on some of this a little bit. As we all know, a tremendous amount of time and effort is spent reconciling information between customer and supplier. Their version of the purchase order, our version of the purchase order. Our version of the invoice, their version of the invoice. Their information about what was shipped, our information about what was received, and so forth and so on. And it's an unfortunate fact of the history of the way business has evolved that we either invest huge amounts of money and time and effort in reconciling all of this information back and forth between our organizations because we can't trust those other guys. Even if we trust them to not intentionally try to steal from us, we don't necessarily trust that their record-keeping systems are as good as our record-keeping systems are. Or maybe they're afraid that their record-keeping systems are as bad as our record-keeping systems are. Either way, the point is we spend a lot of time and money on that, because if we don't, we end up losing a lot of money from the cost of everything from double payments to wrong shipments to paying incorrect billed amounts and so forth. In a blockchain-based environment, all the activities are recorded in real time. Everybody can look at the same set of data and have systems that automatically track that information, look at that shared blockchain information. Each time it's updated, everyone in the ecosystem who's authorized to see that updated information can see it. You also have people like regulators or auditors or customs authorities and so forth that are not allowed to update that information, but can themselves in real time be able to see that information as they're authorized to do. And this is going to impact, is already beginning to impact every industry. After financial services, and the banks got a head start because they got so freaked out 5 or 6 years ago when they thought that Bitcoin and other digital currencies actually might disintermediate the entire global financial network. Not that 10 years ago a lot of people would have felt like they'd missed it, but from a real perspective, we can't run our economy without these financial services institutions. Well, by the time these mostly major banks around the world had investigated digital currencies and blockchain technology enough to realize that no, these currencies may eventually, digital currencies may eventually become a fourth major payment mechanism in addition to cash, checks, and debit and credit cards that emerged over the last 30 or 40 years, that they're not going to disintermediate banks. But by the time they realized that, they also realized that they could be used to dramatically improve costs and the quality and timeliness of financial services. And so they got a head start on everybody else. But supply chain and logistics and procurement is probably the leading application around the world in virtually every different industry for blockchain technology. In retail in particular, but to a certain extent in other industries, certainly the consumer products industry and much of the technology industry, we're going to see very significant impacts of blockchain. More transparent supply chain means we'll be able to improve sales forecasting, inventory control. It'll be audited in real time, not post-audited, and rapid and transparent transactions. The Mercado Libre production system is just one example of that. But also, improving consumer trust and transparency. There is a blockchain initiative called Everledger that is tracking diamonds from the mines in Africa and other places around the world where they're mined, all the way to the retail shelves. So that now when you go into a retailer to purchase a diamond, you can know exactly what the provenance of that diamond was and who owned it all the way back to the mine, and know you're not purchasing a blood diamond or supporting some illegal warlord in a war-torn third world country that's using slave labor to mine those diamonds and enrich himself. There's also a system out there called Provenance that is doing similar type of work for a variety of consumer products, foods, and so forth. Elimination of counterfeit goods. Okay, you know, you can walk down the streets of Hong Kong and many other cities around the world and get remarkably good prices on Rolex watches and Louis Vuitton purses and so forth. And how do you eliminate that kind of abuse? Well, a lot of it is by tracking. It may be a little more difficult with the people that are just selling on the sidewalk, but a lot of it, certainly when it comes to what's available through legitimate stores and so forth, being able to have the provenance of that information and tracking it. Tilcal, and by the way, you'll have links on your PDF copies to each of these sites if you want to dig into these areas, learn more about them. Same thing with warranties. Man, tracking and managing warranties is just such a difficult thing to do for the companies that are selling products under warranty, and it's very hard for the procurers of those products to be able to keep track of what's under warranty, and is it worth it to try to bother to submit it. But if, on the other hand, a product is defective in some way, or becomes defective or breaks down too soon, and all the information about the product, the purchase of the product, and the warranty on that product is readily available on the blockchain, now it becomes very quick and easy to submit the information about the defect and recover via the warranty. Customer loyalty is another area. and keeping track not only of loyalty points so that customers can get maximum value out of their loyalty points and really feel like they're benefiting from being in your loyalty program to the full amount that they intend to, and allowing you to control it, making sure that nobody is fraudulently taking advantage of a customer loyalty program, even allowing points to be interchanged in online loyalty points market exchanges similar to what we see for foreign exchanges, so that you could do such things, for example, as have a young man pay for the purchase of the groceries they bought for their dinner party this weekend using his airline frequent flyer miles. And of course, consumer payments. There's a link that says who accepts Bitcoin as payments, and it's not just about Bitcoin. There are several other digital currencies that are likely to continue to grow in their acceptance for payments for those people who prefer to do it. And by the way, being willing to accept Bitcoin doesn't mean that you have to take the risk of the value of holding Bitcoin, because there are exchanges out there that are providing the service of immediately converting Bitcoin to fiat currencies, and do so at a tiny fraction of the percent. Typically, that you would pay a credit card company in processing transactions for you. Typically, credit card companies, depending on the credit card and the amount of business you do with them, you're going to pay anywhere from 1 to as high as perhaps 4% of the cost for processing a transaction. We're typically looking at costs less than 0.2%, and sometimes considerably less than that for processing digital currency transactions. So blockchain is going to impact every part of business, from operations to IT, supply chain to finance, human resources, managing your data, logistics, marketing, compliance, procurement, customer service. Who doesn't see an area they work in reflected here? Well, we got marketing even in there, Jeff, so there you go. So lots of exciting opportunities around blockchain technologies. And it's cool to think about this stuff, but you know, none of this matters unless your business has a strategy for blockchain transformation, or more explicitly, blockchain-enabled digital transformation. And having a strategy for blockchain-enabled digital transformation means starting with awareness and understanding, especially across the senior management team of your organization. You don't need to know how to build a transmission in order to know how to drive a car. You don't have to understand all the technical details of how blockchain technology is implemented in order to understand how you can use it as a tool to better manage your organization and take cost and delay and errors out of the relationships between your organization and your external parties, suppliers, customers, what have you. And you've got to start with that. Last summer, Cognizant, a major Indian IT outsourcing company, did a study to look at the most common hurdles to blockchain adoption. Came up with a whole list of those things that were the things that were keeping people in companies as users or potential users of blockchain from moving ahead. And every single one on that list is reflective of what we see in the first 3 items. The most common, that over 50% reflected understanding blockchain and the use cases, communicating it to key executive decision makers, evaluating the cost benefits of use cases. But none of the issues on this list have to do with technology. None of these have anything to do with, well, is blockchain secure enough? Is it scalable enough? Is it fast enough? Now, that doesn't mean every theoretical technology issue has been resolved. It's very similar to where we were 20 years ago with the internet, when that fellow came up to me and told me, well, you know, you'll never be able to do electronic banking online. He was actually right, in the sense that if his boss had come up to him working at a bank and said, I want you to get electronic banking online in the next 90 days, the technology didn't exist. But as I think I pointed out, it was not more than 18 to 24 months before that bank and all of their competitors were rolling out online electronic banking. The same thing is going on with blockchain. But let me tell you this, the brilliant engineers and technologists and scientists even that are addressing the technical limitations of blockchain as they exist today are going to be solving those problems way faster than your organization can possibly adapt its business models, its business process, and participate in the evolution of its business ecosystems to take full advantage of that technology. So do not let anybody at your company tell you, well, I've heard there are some technical limitations to blockchain, so we better not waste any time even looking at it or thinking about it until they solve all those. We saw what happened to the companies that decided they were going to wait until every possible technical limitation on the internet was resolved before they got involved. They got blockbustered. Don't let that happen to your organization. Blockchain does play a critical role in digital transformation. Most emerging technologies, and these are all important technologies, and your organization should be looking at them and thinking about all of them that are applicable, and most of these are applicable to virtually all of your organizations. But they're point solutions in the sense that they apply at a specific organizational point or within a particular process or even a particular geographic location, for example, such as an Internet of Things sensor that's on a physical object in a given location or traveling from point A to point B. Blockchain is different in that it provides the decentralized infrastructural glue that can tie all of those points together, not only within your own organization, but across your business ecosystems, and that means it enables the digital transformation of not just individual business processes or even overall organizations and business models, but entire business and social ecosystems. Now, look at what's happened in the distribution of music over the last 10 to 15 years and how that ecosystem can change. Okay, how many people can remember going down to the corner record store and buying, for the younger ones here, CDs, for those of us with a little more gray, vinyl albums, all right, if you wanted new music? Who does that? When was the last time you went to a record store? Anybody? Yeah, not anymore. We download it all. Now, as it happens, Apple positioned themselves very cleverly at the center of that ecosystem and dominated through iTunes. Even that's beginning to change. Musicians are now starting to sell their music on the blockchain directly to end customers. And instead of getting 10 or 15% royalties, they're getting 98%. But blockchain transformation is not just about force-fitting blockchain or any of these other new technologies into your existing business processes and infrastructure. You need to understand that blockchain is a team sport. That means you need to work with others in your organization, in your industry, in your ecosystem, the other participants, the other entities you interact with, to identify where and how you can most effectively leverage blockchain technology. Now, if there's anybody here, raise your hands if you've been around long enough to remember the early days of electronic data interchange, or EDI, back in the 80s. Anyone want to admit to being that old? Okay. All right. I was heavily involved in that myself. And one of the keys was people had to agree on what the standard formats were for EDI. Same kind of principle holds true with blockchain. It's not about taking away competitive advantage. It's just like we all use the same kind of phone system. Some companies just use them a lot better, but we all agree it would be better for us to all use phone systems that work on the same principles than for each company to try to force all of its trading partners to use its own dedicated way of making telephone calls or doing EDI. The same thing holds true with blockchain. Start rethinking your business, government, and social ecosystems and what your company's role is in that ecosystem. How do you bring value to the ecosystem as a whole, which is going to include your customers as well as your suppliers? And what are the things that you're doing now that may go away as a result of blockchain technologies? You probably don't want to invest a lot of time and effort in those. And where are the things where you have unique core competencies that will allow you to add even more value in a blockchain environment and may allow you to grow your business, expand your footprint, increase your profitability and your margins? Rethink your business model within the broader ecosystem, and then use any and all of these technologies, not just blockchain, but the others I talked about yesterday and today, to implement that new vision of the future. And what we have learned over the years in working with emerging technologies for over 3 decades now, is that the ideal approach, what we have found works most effective in developing a strategy, the question comes up, well, how do you change the wheels while you keep the car rolling down the street? We can't just stop our business, change the way everything works, and start it back up again. Well, an approach was defined more clearly about 15 or 20 years ago out of McKinsey called third horizon planning. The idea is there's three parallel components. First, you look out, depending on the size of your and complexity of your company, anywhere from 3 to 5 to perhaps at the outside 10 years. For most of your companies, 3 to 5 to maybe 7 years. I mean, trying to look more than 10 years down the road, that's science fiction, okay? It's the movie Minority Report, great fun, but it's not practical. Things change too fast. But you certainly can look out, and if you can look out 5 years, that's time enough to change almost anything. How is your blockchain-enabled digital ecosystem likely to be different 5 years from now? And what is your digital enterprise going to need to look like to take full advantage of those changes? And what are the things you're doing today that you will still do in a blockchain-enabled, digitally transformed future, even if in ways that are radically different and digitally transformed from how you do them today? Do you want to invest a lot of time and money into enhancing your invoice processing capabilities? Probably not. I mean, if you have a serious problem at the moment, you might have to fix it to get you through the next year or 2 or 3 or 4 years. But long term, do you want to invest in something that you understand is going to be going away? On the other hand, sourcing will never go away. There will always be new products and services coming into the market. There will always be new suppliers of existing products and services coming into the markets with new and creative and better and different ways of doing things. So sourcing is always going to be with us, even if it becomes AI-driven, blockchain-enabled capabilities that far exceed our sourcing capabilities today. What are you still going to be doing in the future, and how do you need to evolve to the future version of how that could work within your organization? Then, what are the things you're not doing now, but you could be doing in the future, or would like to be doing in the future, or perhaps will need to do in the future to continue to participate? And that's where the second horizon planning comes in, where you do the skunk works activities, if you will, the proofs of concept, where you become familiar with the emerging technologies, AI and machine learning, natural language processing, Internet of Things technology, certainly blockchain technology. How are those going to impact your business? 3D printing for some of you, and how are you going to develop a familiarity and a comfort with using the technology, but also how are you going to test out and work with and try new kinds of business processes and business practices? The people from Amazon that had dinner with the other night were telling me about all of the fascinating tests that they've been going through in their grab-and-go stores in Seattle, testing out how to make what I described as commonplace in the near future actually really work in terms of not having people have to go through cashiers and cash registers and walk out of the stores with the product they want, while still making sure that it was all properly paid for. Testing the business practices and business processes is just as important as testing the new technologies. The idea being that while you evolve your current first horizon technologies in the direction of where you want to be in the long term, and you learn and build on the evolution of the new technologies, eventually those two merge into your vision of the future. And it's developing and implementing that vision of the future that is the opportunity for your organization and your own professional growth to be able to help drive the changes that blockchain and these other technologies will enable, so that your organization and ones you may work for in the future will be able to grow with strategic benefits and competitive advantages. I wish you very well in accomplishing these objectives, and would be delighted to help you if I can do so in any way. Thank you so much for listening.
I think the true measure of somebody's mastery of a complex topic is being able to explain it at the simplest level so that everyone in the room can understand. And just looking around over the last hour, there were head nods and furious scribbling of notes and high interest, so thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. We have just a couple minutes before we go to break, and I know this is a hot topic. Jack will be around during the break as well, right. But if there is a need or desire to ask a question in the main session, we can certainly do that. And if not, we can just go through a couple housekeeping items and then take a break.
So do we have any questions? Who has the first question? We got a couple minutes. We can take a couple of questions, I think. Oh, go ahead. Don't
the
be
back.
shy. I've heard this. Oh, way in the back. Way in the back. Okay, good.
Sorry, simple technology question, Jack. And what is the concern around the energy requirements of supporting blockchain for transactions? Will running the distributed ledgers for accounts payable for Fortune 500 companies require the energy of 10 suns, or how is that coming down over time?
Well, fortunately, protecting information doesn't require anywhere near the computing power that hacking into it requires. It literally takes billions to trillions of times more compute capability to hack properly hashed and cryptographically secured information than to secure it. Having said that, those problems arise primarily from the fact that the Bitcoin blockchain itself is incredibly energy consumptive in the way it works, and I'm not going to get into the details of how that works. Some of you may have read about something called Bitcoin mining. Right now, the Bitcoin blockchain on an ongoing basis is currently using the same amount of energy as the country of Austria, which is 39th in the world in its energy consumption. A year and a half ago, it was Peru, which is 62nd. So the Bitcoin blockchain is moving up the list of countries in terms of its consumption of energy, obviously something that's not sustainable in the long term. So people are working on a variety of other technologies in terms of the underlying cryptography and synchronization capabilities of blockchain technologies. The Bitcoin blockchain is the oldest application, but there are a number of newer ones. The best one known is Ethereum. There are other new ones coming on, and these technologies will make it much more cost-effective, faster, more sustainable to be able to use blockchain. And these are examples of some of the kinds of technical issues that the brilliant engineers and technicians and scientists are working on now to solve. Time for one more? Anyone?
Just a quick one, Jack.
Yes.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to give away my age, I guess. I remember building systems around the first mobile phones at the beginning of the 80s, and then we had the internet websites that we were developing at the beginning of the 90s. And then the first social media stuff started coming out at the beginning of the 2000s. Now we're finally using them all to actually, have a lot of commerce around them, and that's what's actually pushed things more quickly. I know we got to get up to speed with everybody on education and use cases, and this is clearly the next wave. But my question to you is, what do you estimate it's really going to take to get in place everywhere? Are we talking 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years when you think about the dates that I just told you?
I look at two aspects to that. Excellent question. Everybody hear the question? Okay, good. One is, I believe that within the next 2 to 3 years, we will see widespread use of blockchain technology. Now, I define widespread use as being that most Global 2000 corporations will have at least a handful of blockchain-based systems or enabled systems in production. So the use of blockchain will become widespread, literally hundreds of times of what it is today. Still a small amount of all the transactions done in the entire $78 trillion world economy, which will be much bigger by that time. But I think over the course of the 2020s, we will see an accelerated adoption of blockchain. And we're really going to see a hockey stick, because as various ecosystems begin to move toward adoption of blockchain, the desirability to participate in those blockchain-enabled ecosystems will increase in value as an incentive for other entities, organizations, and people to get on board. And the undesirability of being left out will also be an incentive for people to get on board. So I think within, surely by the late 2020s, we will see, at least among large organizations, near universal adoption of blockchain technologies. For smaller companies and individuals, it'll be somewhat similar, but in that case, it will not be so much a conscious decision on the parts of very small businesses and individuals to get on the blockchain as it will be for them to take advantage of blockchain-enabled services and software and so forth that they can use through their laptops or their mobile devices or what have you. So I think that for all practical purposes, within the next, say, 15 years, we will see essentially universal adoption of blockchain comparable to what we've seen over the last 25 years with the internet. Great question. Thanks again. I will be around during the break. It would be a pleasure to talk with each of you one-on-one. Pierre, I would definitely like to get with you for a minute one-on-one too before we head out. And again, thanks so much.